moving on to that next point in our journey, our minds are woken up. And so now we're going to say, we've asked with our reason, we've engaged our reason.
What are we doing?
We've engaged our reason. Just 1 second. Can I have that really quick? This, I'll give it back to you. So we've engaged our reason, and now we're going to engage our spiritual longings. We're going to be looking up and seeing and letting in revelation. So women in the Tanakh, we will let them explain that, but I wanted to introduce them. I feel very privileged to have met Yisca Harani during the time of coronavirus when she came as an outstanding educator. She's very well known for that, to educate some of the people who guide pilgrims and tourists here in Israel. She is a lecturer, scholar, consultant, and guide on Christianity in the Holy Land. Now, one of the things I first saw was her explanation of the Mass from the Basilica of the Nativity on Christmas. And so it's wonderful for her to be able to explain this as an Israeli, as a Jewish woman, to people. She understands Christianity very well, and so it's nice to open up a window to that. So she studied at Tel Aviv University in the history department and is specialized in religious studies. Her field of expertise is obviously, Christianity here in the Holy Land. So since 1990, she has trained and continues to train thousands of students. I think some of you may have been in some of her courses. It's wonderful to have you. She trains teachers, tour guides, diplomats, and civil servants in the field of Christianity. Only in this way can we enter into true dialogue, I think. She serves as an ad hoc consultant for government ministries, among them the Ministry of Public Security, the Ministry of Religions, the Ministry of Tourism, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Prime Minister's Office, and she's also a consultant for private and public companies and is frequently interviewed on public broadcasting channels. If you have any complaints about anything that's happening around, you can talk to her. No pressure. So for many years, she has been active in interreligious dialogue, for which she was presented, and this is what I want to underline. It's the Mount Zion Foundation Award for Reconciliation in 2013, and I'm going to say this wrong, but I'll do my best. The Laszt Ecumenical and Social Concern Award in 2023, and for that, she really does deserve a round of applause, and so we're delighted to have her. Now, if you're interested in reading more, we don't have copies here, but boy, do we have internet. So you can look online for a recently published, this is in 2022, a guide on Christianity for Israeli diplomats. And that's on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So this is Yisca, welcome. And we also have together with her, as you see, this is a table with 2 chairs. This is a dialogue, and many of the conferences we're having now will have 2 people here at the table. And so we have Rabbi Lana Zilberman Soloway. She was born in Moscow, and she made Aliyah to Israel at the age of 8. And this is why she speaks Hebrew so well, and so many other languages. And we're delighted to have her mother and her daughter, who actually was the first one almost to make it to the top, or to our goal at Mount Arbel this morning. And so she grew up in Netanya, and at the age of 18 was drafted, obviously, into IDF and served as an intelligence officer in the Gaza Strip, actually. She holds a BA in East Asian culture from the Hebrew University, and is also a musician. She is a Bachelor of Music in Piano Performance and Voice. And we sang the psalm this morning as we saw the sunrise over the Sea of Galilee up on the top of Mount Arbel. And she, let's see, what else can I say about this wonderful woman? She holds that degree from the Jerusalem Music Academy and a Master of Arts in Professional Jewish Studies from the Spertus Institute in Chicago, and a rabbinic ordination from the Shalom Hartman Institute. And she does a lot with them still. So she was telling me, and I hope she can share some of an activity she just participated in recently, this past week, I think. The last 15 years, she has been working in the field of informal Jewish education as an educator, tour guide, group leader, lecturer, and facilitator in Israel, Europe, and the United States. So in addition to that, she has led interfaith Bet Midrash at the Hebrew University, and a tour guide training program for the Ministry of Tourism. Okay, so currently, in addition to teaching and guiding, she holds a position as the rabbinic liaison and Director of Community Outreach for Rabbis for Human Rights. And she lives in a gorgeous place. I just love it. Do you have it written here? But it's Mevat Saret Zion, but it's right outside of Jerusalem next to Abu Ghosh, which is what I know it as, rather, with her husband Daniel and their 3 children. So we're going to be letting them guide us through Revelation. What is it that the Tanakh, the writings and the Torah, the Old Testament, for those of you who aren't familiar with that terminology, tell us about feminine identity? Welcome.
Thank you so much.
I'll have to share this back and forth as well. Let me give this to you.
Anyone still needs Hebrew texts in Hebrew?
Just
The Hebrew one. Thank you. Think.
זה ביחד.
Put it around your neck.
אל תשימי בנק, כי אנחנו עושים דיאלוג בהתחלה. אז אנחנו פשוט נעשה את זה.
אוקיי. אחת. Shalom. Thank you for inviting us here. It's really an incredible privilege, honor, a great opportunity. So you've heard about us, but it's not really who we are. I want to ask you, can you tell me what your name is?
Absolutely. I'm Miriam.
Where were you born?
I believe I was born in Egypt by the Nile River.
Do you have family that I would recognize, brothers, sisters?
Yes, I have 2 brothers. I also have parents. And we live there in Egypt.
Was there anything dramatic you did in your life that you can pinpoint?
Well, I am actually very modest, and I don't want to take a lot of credit. But I do believe that I was the reason that one of my brothers actually remained alive.
I'm so fascinated. I'm wondering, what could that be? Did you change your address throughout your life? Where do you live now?
It's actually a very good question. Let me think about it for a minute. I believe that I changed several locations, but in the same country. So I remain in the desert, close to Egypt.
שואלי אותי עכשיו.
What about you? Who you are? Would you share your name, please?
Thank you for asking. My name is Abigail, or actually the way my mother used to call me is Avigail, but these foreigners call me Abigail.
So Abigail, do you have children of your own?
That's a bit of a sad story. The one that I raise now is with me, but the children that I had before, I actually don't know where they are.
I'm very sorry to hear that. How about a husband? Are you married?
I'm married the second time. Maybe I'll tell you all from now, and that is that momentarily I live in the palace in Jerusalem. But the way, what I saw when I was a child and then a mother in the first round, I saw the mountains of Hebron in a place called Carmel, not up in the north, but in the Hebron Mountains.
Wow.
Okay, I think we've done the trick, right? So we want to share with you the question of what do we learn from women of the Bible. And I will leave it to Lana, Rabbi Lana, to tell you later what the word Tanach means. But when we say, and we are sisters to sex, gender, culture, and faith. So when we say Bible, we immediately mean the Hebrew Bible. The Bible that was written in the language with which we grew up, with which we prayed, which is our intuitive language. So the Hebrew Bible, and not including other books that you may think that are in our Bible, like the book of Judith, or several chapters in the book of Esther, and so on. So anyways, when we were thinking about women in the Bible, we do have different figures that we admire, and different perspectives of what they really teach us. I had to bring this very heavy book here, which is perhaps the most comprehensive kind of catalog of all the women of the Bible. But I have to exclude from it, for this presentation, the women of the New Testament, but I trust we will speak about them later, or the women of the outside sources, the apocryphal sources, the sources that did not penetrate the Tanakh. So let me share with you from the very start. Why did I choose Abigail? Now, in the Hebrew Bible, when I read throughout my synagogue attendance the stories of Sarah and Hagar and Rebecca and Leah and Rachel, and as I was blessed every Friday, which is what the father does, laying the hands on the children, the girls are being blessed to be as Sarah and Rebecca and Rachel and Leah. But when I searched into these four women, each one a whole world into itself, I said, that doesn't capture what I want to share with you about what it is to be a woman in biblical times. Maybe their stories are too grand. Now, if I take Abigail, her story appears in one chapter, but this chapter pretty much tells me everything that one can say about culture and about life, so challenging back then. So if you please look with me at chapter 25 in the book of Samuel, then you will see where I was born, the other me, a certain man in Maon, it says, who had property there at Carmel. These are two localities in the Hebron Mountains. Don't be mistaken with the Carmel that you know today. That man was very wealthy, and he had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep. I mean, he was tremendously wealthy, which he was sharing in Carmel. He was just now taking the hair of the goats and the sheep. So he's actually like an owner of a big textile factory. He's going to make a really good money from that. Now, his name was Nabal. Now, the word Naval in Hebrew is a very harsh word. If we say about someone that he is a Naval, not Nabal, but Naval, that's awful. This is like a curse. Someone who is wicked. I saw the translations, it says fool, but it's far more than fool. And his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband was surely and mean in his dealings. So what a story to begin with. It's very black and white, but what I'm very proud is that the first way to describe her is her intelligence. The fact that she was very beautiful definitely counts in here, but it's not enough. Now, very quickly, I'll go over with you because we don't have that much time, and that is that while David is running in the desert from Saul, the king who is persecuting him, he surrounds himself with people that the Bible call are bitter in heart. They are lots of people that maybe are semi-criminals. They go around the desert, and to cut a long story short, they come to the workers of Nabal and tell him, you give us food and money in return to the protection that we give you. Now, this is protection money. I don't know if you use it in your languages, but in Hebrew, when you say protection, like this, protection, it means bad money. So they do not agree, and Nabal is becoming very, very upset. On verse 14, it says that one of the servants told Abigail, Nabal's wife, what did he say? David sent messengers from the wilderness to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. So, first of all, it's clear that Abigail is a woman that the servant knows that if he turns to her, things may get to become more bright than what is at stake. What is at stake is that David and his people around him are going perhaps to attack, to be very violent. And then I'll just continue a little bit with this. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us. And the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. So in a way, they are maybe thankful to the fact that these people are guarding. Maybe they're threatened, but they say, we don't have bad things to say about them. The only thing is that if David, the chief of that protecting group, is going to be upset, things are going to get bad. And that's why verse 18 says, Abigail acted quickly. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 seah, a measurement of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs. First of all, it's nice to know what they had in their storage rooms and what they ate, and loaded them on donkeys. Then she told her servants, go ahead, I'll follow you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. Okay, let me stop here. Very practical woman. Now, one of the things that I'm thinking about as we go along with this conference, what is femininity? What is to be a woman? Well, we talk very, very intuitively about a person of empathy, someone who cares for the other, someone whose eyes continuously look at people and see how can we protect the situation. But it's not enough to have empathy. You have to have practicality. In my opinion, if there's something that is the core of my understanding of femininity, is that empathy and practicality must come together. You cannot be just one or the other. So continue down, please, and you'll see, I put the font in bold. So 23 says, when Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, pardon your servant, my lord, and let me speak to you. So this very courageous woman who is taking a decision, and a decision without her husband knowing it, which is a very big question mark that looms in the back, she is approaching David, and actually, one could look at it in a very, very tricky way. She's manipulating him because she falls at his feet, and she's saying, I am your servant. Hear what your servant has to say. Please pay no attention, my lord, to that wicked man, Nabal. He's just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him. Well, I don't want to be that kind of wife that goes behind my husband and says, oh, really, I'll tell you, his name really shows his horrible character. So what is she doing? She goes on in a very, very long speech, which is amazingly long. We don't have too many women that have such long dialogues put down very clearly. She is number one in this dialogue. And so verse 30 says, when the Lord has fulfilled for my Lord every good thing he promised concerning him, she tells David, this is God who fulfilled for you every good thing he promised concerning him and has appointed him ruler over Israel. Wow. She is perceived in Jewish tradition as one of the 7 prophetesses, women prophets. We have a list of 7 women prophets. One of them is Miriam, and of course Hannah. But yes, Abigail is considered to be a prophetess. And in only one tradition of one Jewish community, and that is the Tunisian Jewish community, in the Tunisian Jewish community, a father will bless his daughter to be like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, and Abigail. Wow, only in Tunisia. So David said to Abigail, that is 32, praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself in my own hands. So David sees her as a messenger to stop him, the man who knew what bloodshed is about. He knew it very well. But this was a moment when she, with her common sense, knew how to manipulate the situation for the better and the good. Okay? So 35 says, David accepted from her what she had brought him and said, go home in peace. I've heard your words and granted your request. Finally, he said it. No bloodshed. Now, very quickly, because I don't want to take too much time, the continuation of the story, it's one of the most dramatic stories. I wonder if there are no movies done about only this story. Because she goes back to Nabal, and he's now completely drunk because he had a big feast, because the sharing, the taking of the wool of the sheep, brought a lot of money, and he was completely drunk. She doesn't tell him, she doesn't talk to him. She is a woman. She has her eyes. She knows when to talk. She waits till the morning. She waits to see that he's sober, and then she talks to him. And what she says to him is really very interesting, because there's more that she said than is written here. Because when she says to him what has happened, it says here in the text that his heart became like a stone, and in 10 days he died. Well, was she a kind of Elijah or Elisha or Peter, remember, with Hananiah and Sapphira? Is he like a messenger? Is she like a messenger to do what God wants, which is to take away Nabal from that story? Verse 41 says that David calls her, or let's begin with, is it what number it is? 39. Then David sent word to Abigail, asking her to become his wife. And his servants went to the Carmel and said to Abigail, David has sent us to you to take you to become his wife. She bowed down with her face to the ground and said, I am your servant, am ready to serve you and wash the feet of my Lord's servant. And she went on the donkey and took 5 female servants with her and moved to Jerusalem. Where are her former children? Where is her identity as a woman married before to somebody, living in different kind of world? In the very end of this chapter, there's only 2 verses that also multiply the problematics of what it is to be a woman. David has also married, in verse 43, Achinoam of Jezreel, and they both were his wives. And then Saul had given his daughter Michal, David's wife, to someone called Paltiel. I'm stopping here. There's a great story about Abigail, but there's underlying culture, which is what I can say about the Bible and how throughout the years I had trouble dealing with the women that I'm told to admire. I can admire and I can pity them as well, because in that culture, men completely dominated the scene. Women are always the wife of. They are counted as part of the material good that a man has. It's clear that they have empathy, they have faith, but they're locked. And here is where I see their amazing geniusness. And when Kathleen keeps saying about the genius of women, and I'm saying, what is the genius of women? I think I'm not genius at all, because I was born into a culture where I had freedom to choose and I did not struggle. But these women, within the cage of culture, of patriarchal society, of rules that excluded them from every religious practice. Well, they can come and visit the temple, but they cannot really do anything that is men's relations to God. Well, thank God they don't need to do circumcision, of course, yeah, I know, but it's sort of a kind of symbolic that they are not let into a covenant, because really they are, in those days' perception, they are excluded from the sacred, but within these limits. what these women have done is incredible. And I think that what came as a result is that they had to combine shrewdness. They had to combine sometimes manipulation. They had to be very, very practical. I think the complexity of women, maybe complexity sounds psychological, so I don't want to go there. It's, they have far more feelings, movements, which come out in order to survive in a society that sends them either to a drunken husband or to a violent husband, to move away from your family to another family. And in this, she acts. Does she know that she acts because God has sent her? Jewish tradition says she is a prophetess. She did it because there was an intention that she will be the king's wife. So I don't know, but for me, of all the women, I did not choose Deborah, and we talked a lot about whom to choose, because Deborah, surely she's a fighter, I know, but I don't see her cage. There are women like Rebecca, she's manipulating within her cage, but I don't like too much manipulation. And Abigail, for me, is a real heroine because within her small world, she has really made it to the palace, but rightfully so. Because in the palace, you need not only a king, you need someone who has these abilities, which we lack today in many of our leaders and politicians. We need empathy and how to work in circumstances and to be practical. And downline, below all of this, is her faith that she can do it. And so, Abigail, that's me. Nice meeting you.
Wow, nice to meet you, Abigail. So as we transition from Abigail to Miriam, let's start with a tune that goes like this. La da 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 da. Now you ready? It's very easy. Come on. Da 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 da. One more time so we can remember it. Always good to let the translators a moment to breathe and to rest. So we will come back to this tune. It will be with us. So I want to talk about reclaiming for a little bit. Reclaiming the feminine identity, reclaiming the female identity, because it's true. In the Hebrew Bible, the woman is either the wife of, and if she's not the wife of, she is the mother of, or she is the sister of. And sometimes we know a lot about them, and sometimes we don't know anything at all. And sometimes we only have the name. But either way, we've been reading and retelling these stories for at least 3,000 years, maybe even more. We're not going to start a debate when do we start to count, but we can agree that probably at least for 3,000 years, if not more, we've been telling these stories, whether we know a lot of information or we know a little bit. And actually, the character that I chose, and we've really been talking, and when we saw the title that Caitlin gave us for this conference, like, what do you do with that, right? Women in the Hebrew Bible. There are hundreds of women. We cannot categorize all of them, right? Because every single one of them is an individual. I loved Dr. Rodriguez's definition. It's not the what, it's a who. So there are many who's. How can you choose when you have only 1 hour? So we really decided to each take one that will teach us something from different perspectives. And I want to say that actually, when we don't know a lot of information, it allows us to fill in the gap. And in the Jewish tradition, and I actually believe that in the Christian tradition that follows as well, we've been following up the gap for thousands of years. And sometimes we imagine it, and sometimes we sort of put ourselves in their footsteps, and sometimes we want to feel what they were feeling, right? But we fill up the gap, and that's an amazing thing. So I want us to talk about filling up the gap of several characters, and the main character that I chose is Miriam, who wasn't the wife of, she was definitely a daughter of, but we mainly know her as the sister of two brothers, Aaron and Moses. And as we're approaching in the months, the Hebrew months of Nisan, to the holiday that we're going to be celebrating next week, the holiday of Passover, and we tell the story, the anchor of the Jewish narrative, which is the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt, then very often we tell the story that the people of Israel were led out of Egypt by Moses. But what about the sister and the brother? You know, my oldest daughter is sitting over here. I don't know how much she understands, but I know she'll understand the next one. She always hears two sentences out of me. The first one is, "You are the oldest." It comes with responsibility. And sometimes she likes it, and sometimes she really doesn't like it, but she doesn't have a choice. She's the oldest. But the second sentence that she always hears from me is, "You're not an only child." I am an only child, by the way, so I can say that. But I always tell her, "You're not an only child. You are one of three. So whatever you do, it has to be one of three." And sometimes it can be annoying, but I actually believe that it's the best thing that I could ever done for my children, is to make sure that they are three. So it was not only Moses. It was Moses and Aaron and Miriam. And Miriam has a huge part in this great story. So let's focus on that just for a few minutes to sort of to look deeper. We promised to address the title. So when we say the Hebrew Bible, which is a fine name, and we can say that, but in the Hebrew language, we don't say the Hebrew Bible or the Bible. We say Tanach. And Tanach, actually, if you write it in Hebrew, it has three letters, and each letter stands for something. Ta, na, ch. The ch is very hard. I recognize that. You don't have to do it like me. So the ta, the taf, stands for the Torah. Or, as we say often in English, the 5 books of Moses, right? We have the book of Genesis, and book of Exodus, and Leviticus, and Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So the 5 books of Moses, that's what we refer to as the Torah, or the written law. And then we have the Nun, the N, for all the prophets. Let's be honest, we do have all the prophets in this big chapter, but we have some other books as well. And then the H, it actually stands for Ketuvim, which in simple translation means the written books, as if the others are not written. But there we have the Psalms and the Song of Songs and the 5 scrolls and some more. All together, as you know, in the Hebrew Bible or in the Tanakh, we have 24 books. And that is sort of the anchor of Jewish Hebrew scripture. So when we address it, we call it Tanakh. And every child growing up in Israel or in the Jewish world, everywhere in the world, knows it from a very, very young age. In Israel, they start learning from the 2nd grade, the stories of the book of Genesis and so on. So that's just about the title, but we, of course, move on. So Miriam, this is, of course, from the book of Exodus. We learn about Miriam, who was the daughter of Amram and Yocheved. And they were living in Egypt after the first Hebrew family, left the land of Israel with Abraham, Jacob, Joseph, the 12 sons, and so on, right? They're going to Egypt. Of course, there's a drought. And they overstayed. Nobody was planning to stay there for 400 years, but that's sort of how the story evolved. And now we're jumping in time, and we have this new generation. And we also have a new leader. And the new Pharaoh is not as kind as the initial Pharaoh that met Joseph 400 years earlier. And he actually gives a command to make sure that there are no Jewish babies that are being born. So Miriam is the eldest. She is the oldest of three. And when her baby brother, Moshe, that actually doesn't even have a name yet, he's just a baby, is born, her parents follow the decree of the Pharaoh. And her mother puts the baby boy into a little crib and into the Nile River. And as I'm sure you remember, what happens to that crib and the baby is being picked up by the daughter of the Pharaoh. Here we go, another important woman. She takes the baby, and she's not quite sure what to do with that. And for those of you who ever held a baby, a newborn baby, you know that they're quiet, they're not. Usually they're very loud, and they're crying because that's their way to communicate with the world. And they're hungry. And if you're not going to give them something to eat, they're going to continue crying because they don't know otherwise. So this poor child that the daughter of the Pharaoh is holding in her arms is crying. And a solution needs to be found. So if you look at the scripture just for a minute, first of all, I underline, so we're not going to go through all of that. His sister stood at the distance to see what would happen to him, right? That's the description about Miriam standing, watching her baby brother is going down the river. And she's like, oh my God, what's going to happen to him? And then fast forward, she saw with her own eyes that the Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slave to get it. She opened it and saw the baby, and the baby was crying, and she felt sorry for him. And she said in her heart, not out loud, she said in her heart, this is one of the Hebrew babies, right? And then Miriam saw her. She saw her intentions to pick him up. And she saw her own baby brother. And she wanted to save him. She wanted to help him. So she reaches out to the daughter of the Pharaoh. And she asks her, shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women that can feed him? And the daughter of the Pharaoh that sees the situation said, yes, please. And then Miriam goes to her own mother and brings her own mother without anybody knowing to breastfeed the baby. And only after a while, a long while as we know today, of course the Bible doesn't tell us that, when it was the right time to separate, she gives it to the daughter of the Pharaoh that raises him until the baby that is also now given a name, the Hebrew name is Moshe. Why? Because she mashta oto me'amayim. She brought him out of the water. That's his name, Moshe. That's how you say. He was brought out of the water. But at the end of the day, who truly, truly, truly saved his life? His sister, Miriam. She did not want to say goodbye. She is the eldest child. She was responsible. And she was looking at him from the very, very beginning and all the way throughout. And when she saw a situation, then she needed to make sure that he will remain alive, and she was willing to do whatever it takes. By the way, we have no indication that Moshe will become Moshe. At this point, it's just a story about a child. We can share this picture. You know, we have a beautiful book in our house by Levin Kipnis. He's an Israeli author, and he wrote the stories of the Torah. And he added these beautiful pictures, like this one, for example. And my kids love it. So we just, read these stories before bed. Because at this point, that's what it is. It's just a story. But of course, we know much more because Moshe, the baby, becomes the leader. But let us not forget that he does not become the leader only by himself. but his brother and sister are very, very important to the journey. I'm jumping into Exodus chapter 15. That is already after the plagues and after the big drama of going to Pharaoh and telling him, let my people go, again and again. And it's already after that they took themselves and ran away from Egypt, and they got to the Red Sea, and Moses parted the Red Sea, and they went through the dry sea and ended up on the other side. And now we come to one of the most beautiful verses of the entire Torah. And why did I start us off with a tune, with a melody? Because it's a huge shira. You know, shira, the word shira is a tricky word to translate. It's tricky because shir usually has two meanings in Hebrew. It can be a poem that somebody wrote, or it can be a song with a melody that somebody composed. But shira, it's almost like a liminal type situation. It's like the in-between. It has the lyrics, and maybe it also has the music, I'm not sure, but how do you translate? If you say a poem, it's not precise. If you say a song, it's not exactly. So maybe in the biblical context, that's what it should be. Shira. If you imagine all of these people, hundreds of thousands of people, they just escaped Egypt. And they are standing on the other side of the Red Sea that was parted just for them. And what they want to do? What they want to do? They want to praise God. They want to say thank you for such miracle, for being on their side, for parting the sea, for not letting them go, for keeping up his promise. All of these people, so many bad things could have happened to them all the way, and it didn't. So they want to say thank you. And how they say thank you? By shira, which is not a poem or a song. It's something in between. It's a praise. Maybe we should say in Hebrew, hallel. It's a praise to God in a form of combination of poetry and singing. And it starts with talking about Moshe. If I'll open up at the beginning of the chapter, by the way, my Tanakh is very, very small, but nevertheless, Shira, we have several places in the Tanakh where we have Shira. And it's always written in a very, very special way. It's not written line after line after line, but the lines are separated. When we read Torah in the synagogue from a scroll, then usually after we finish reading, we raise it up so everybody could see the verses that we just read. So every single time it's a shira, everybody can identify it from far away, just because how the words are laid out on the parchment. It's a very, very precise methodology of the scribes to write and to lay out the words of the shira. So at the beginning, it starts with Moshe. It says, "Az yashir Moshe u'bnei Israel et hashira azot la'Adonai." Moses and the Israelites sang this song to the Lord. And then it goes on and on and on and on and on. And in many synagogues, we sing it with the melody that we started with, that I hope you remember. We will be going back to it very soon. But then, after 19 verses, the person, the scribe of the book of Exodus, remembers, hey, it's not only Moses, it's Miriam. They don't forget her. And therefore, in verse 20, we read, then Miriam, the prophet, by the way, Moses is not called like that, at least not here. And she gets this honorable title. Miriam, the prophet, Aaron's sister. You noticing this? It's almost like this, a little bit of a sarcastic moment. She's also Moses' sister. Maybe she's even more Moses' sister than Aaron's sister because she saved his life. But the scribe of the verses tells us that she is Aaron's sister. Maybe it's intentional. We want to underline that Aaron is also important. Of course, he's important. We know that. We have a lot of information about Aaron. So Miriam, the prophet Aaron's sister, picked up a hand drum, and all the women went out after her in dance with hand drums. And Miriam is an active participant. It's not like she's just standing there looking at them. No, she plays an instrument and she sings and she leads them in dancing. And Miriam chanted for them, "Sing to God, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver he has hurled into the sea." And I really imagine in my mind this epic moment of all of these people. And in the middle of them, there is a circle of women that are standing, dancing, singing, playing instruments, and glorifying God for this incredible moment. The name Miriam. Well, maybe I should switch the vowels in the Hebrew language and say Mar Yam. Yam is a sea. Mar means bitter. They say that when we cry, our tears are either salty or bitter because there's sadness into them, right? So her story is not always joyous. There's a lot of sadness in the story. But she comes with an attribute. And her attribute is the well, the water. The poor people fled out of Egypt. They went through the Red Sea, and now what? I guess Moses was not such a good tour guide because they did not go straight into the Holy Land. And if you know the map, they totally could have. It's a straight line from the Red Sea to the Holy Land. It's literally a straight line. They're not walking in that direction. They're going really around. And of course, there are reasons for it and everything. But 40 years in the desert, it's so hot and it's so dry and there is no food. And the most important thing, there is no water. So the attribute of Miriam, is the well. And we have many, many interpretations about the well. Wherever the people go, the well goes with them. Wherever they go, all the way until the last day of Miriam's life, they had water. And when Miriam died, by the way, at the month of Nisan, which is now, then the water was over as well. And until today, we try to interpret and look for that water. Where is that water? Where is that well? The attributes of Miriam. Every single one of these women, of course also men, but here we are talking about women. Every single one of these women have lifelong legacy. And in the course of history, and it doesn't matter if we talk about the Bible or we talk about something that happened 20 years ago or 100 years ago, it's just the way of life. Some people are more remembered than others. And sometimes we really have good reasons for that, and sometimes it's just the way it is. But Miriam really left a legacy, not in order to say that she was more important than any other of the hundreds of women that are in the Tanakh, but nevertheless. So I want to talk briefly about those legacies or some traditions that we do until today that remind us of who she was. So as you can understand, I'm a liberal rabbi. If I was ultra-Orthodox, most likely I wouldn't be able to be a rabbi. Although I will say that even there are cracks and more possibilities and opportunities, even for Orthodox female to become religious leaders. I was ordained at the Shalom Hartman Institute, which is actually egalitarian, which allows men and women to study Torah together and to be ordained together. But nevertheless, I'm a liberal female religious leader. And on our Passover table, which we will celebrate with my family next Wednesday night, we're going to have all the traditional attributes, but we're also going to have two more modern contemporary additions. One is the orange. What on earth an orange does on a Seder plate, you want to ask. And you are right. And the story reminds us of another woman, modern woman from the 20th century. The name of this woman, she's actually still with us, is Susanna Heschel. I should say Professor Susanna Heschel. And Professor Susanna Heschel is a daughter of one of the most famous, influential rabbis of the 20th century, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. And Susanna, when she was younger, wanted to be a rabbi. So she knocked on the door of the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, and she said, I am the daughter of, and I want to, her father was one of the professors in that institution. And so said, I want to be a rabbi. It was in the 70s. The dean of the institute looked at her and said, we don't have women rabbis. And then he told her mockingly, there will be a place for women to be religious leaders in Judaism when there will be a place for an orange on the Seder plate. So ever since, many, many, many liberal Jewish families all over the world, including my own, add an orange to the Seder plate because we have religious female leaders. The other attributes that we add to the Seder plate is a special cup that is called the Miriam's cup. We have another special cup that is traditional, and that is the cup for Elijah, the prophet. That one we fill with wine. The cup of Miriam we fill with water. And it reminds us about Miriam, about her story, or her part of the story, and also, of course, about her attribute of the water. The other time we often remember her is at the ceremony that I hope we will do together tomorrow night, when we part and we say goodbye to the holiness of Shabbat, the Sabbath day. It's a beautiful ceremony called Havdalah that differentiates between the holy of the Shabbat and the mundane. And when we finish the ceremony, it's very brief but very sweet, we sing to Elijah. We almost like invite him to come. And then some women said, wait a minute, why we only call to Elijah? We also want to invite a female figure. And who the female figure that was chosen for that honor is Miriam, the prophet. So if we'll have the ability to do that together tomorrow night, then we will remember her. And of course, more than all of that is the Midrash. Midrash is commentaries, many, many different commentaries. And again, for 3,000 years, we fill up the gap. And the gap can come in many shapes and forms. For example, there's this lovely book that was issued in Israel by an Orthodox woman that talks about many different figures in the Tanakh, including Miriam. Or this one that came out literally a year ago that has 250 women, 250 Israeli women that wrote a complete commentary to all the 5 books of the Torah. It's absolutely incredible. It's called Davri Torah, Speak Torah, or Preach or Teach Torah. I really hope that one day it will be translated to English. And it has commentaries, it has poetry, it has all kinds of different explanations, and all of it was created by women. So we're getting to the end of our time, I know. So just to say that women voices is a true blessing. And there are several places in the Tanakh when we have women shira, the singing, the praising of women. Miriam, of course, is the first one. Deborah, that Abigail mentioned, is, of course, also very famous shira. We often talk about Hannah, the mother of Samuel, who taught us, human being, how to pray. But that prayer, through the Midrash, is often looked as a shira as well. And then we actually have numerous places throughout that we don't have names attached, but it has written in the feminine voice in Hebrew, saying, women sang. So we have many, 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 many places throughout the Torah about the singing, about the music. And music is an amazing thing that brings people together, that we will end as the satiety that we started. But just before, I want to share with you a very, very quick passion project that I run during these days that really sums up a lot of the things that we touched on. So it's called Israeli Values, Religious Voices. You can go online and just click israelivalues.org. I've addressed and asked 75 religious leaders from different backgrounds, from different faiths within the Israeli society to write a letter to the State of Israel for its 75th birthday. And in each letter, I requested to choose a value and a quote from sources and to elaborate in 250 words. If you'll go on the website, you will see the faces of the people who wrote letters. Today we published letter number 57. The last letter will arrive in a little bit less than a month on Israeli Independence Day, which is like mid-April. First of all, you will be able to see later on all of these beautiful faces and just the diversity of who they are. Of course, many of them are women and from different walks of life and from different faiths. And then if you click on them, then you will be able to see the value that each leader chose to address. And if you're gonna click one more time, for example here, then you will get to the actual letter. And one of my wonderful friends, who is a rabbi in the Galilee, in Kibbutz Hanaton, her name is Shira, and the value that she chose to address is Shira Beyachad, which I translated with great difficulty to singing together. And actually, the quote that she chose to put in the letter is from chapter 15 in the book of Exodus, which is exactly what we started with. And her drash, or midrash, about singing together, she said, singing together has a healing power. Singing together brings people closer to one another, heart to heart. Singing groups are typically Israeli. We sing together from birth, and much of our childhood education is expressed with song. May we enable the singing to continue and flourish. So to wrap it up, I invite you to join me with the same melody that after we'll sing it once, I'll put the words from Exodus 15 to come to a full circle with Miriam. Together. One more time. ותיקח מרים הנביאה אחות אהרון את הטוב בידה ותצאן כל הנשים אחריה בתופים ובמחולות ותען להם מרים שירו לאדוני כי גאו גאה סוס ורוכבו רמה בים la 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 Yes, there's a lot of microphones.
Yes. Well, as you can see, there's a richness, not just in the philosophical thought, but also in different theological perspectives, right? And I would invite you to take this time. We do have the optional Catholic Mass, I said at 12:45, but have some conversations both with Yisca and also with Rabbi Lana about them and what's the difference between an ordination as a rabbi and perhaps what we might understand as Christians or as Catholics, what that means. It's just very interesting to understand, and we'll continue in this river of the revelation of what femininity is. I have to just say something. I love Abigail, but we were just doing a virtual pilgrimage called Freedom, following the footsteps of Moses in the Exodus. And so we went to one of the wells of Moses in the desert. And we spoke about Miriam, of course, very close to what we call now Hor, which is where they have the burial place of Aaron. And if you read Exodus in that whole chapter, you'll see that it's after Miriam passes away, after Miriam dies, and suddenly they don't have any water. And that's when Moses and Aaron get into the whole point of hitting the rock twice and the whole issue with that, if you're familiar with the story. So yes, Miriam is very connected to all of that. It's very interesting. And again, that brings us back to that image of water that we started with. It brings us back to that water in the middle of our lobby here in Magdala, in the middle of Duke and Alton. So it says a lot to us. So very, very well chosen. And so for those of you who are joining us live stream, thank you again. We will see you this afternoon as we continue speaking about Revelation and understanding more about feminine identity. God bless you all.
Thank you.